Okay, so in the first session we were discussing about what is logic and stuff, why logic is important. Now we'll come to the types of logic, or rather, instead of saying the types of logic, I would rather say how we are going to study the subject and how we are going to use the subject. Basically, in this entire session, or when you take the CLAT examinations, there are two things which are important. First is the analytical reasoning, okay, and the second is the critical reasoning. Now, analytical reasoning is associated with the analysis of the basic concepts, or I would say learning of the basic concepts which are there in logic, learning of the basic essential rules which are there in the logic, okay. And critical reasoning is the application. Well, as far as your examinations are concerned, it would only be the critical reasoning that would be there, because what you would be doing in your examination is that you would be applying the basic concepts, fundamental rules. Now, fundamental rules is something that we would be discussing today, and its application is something that we would be discussing at a later stage, or not a later stage, I mean to say in our next sessions with the help of examples and materials. So, as I was telling that there are two elements. One is the analytical reasoning, the other is critical reasoning. Now, we are going to study three things today. The first thing that would be is regarding syllogisms, okay? The second thing is regarding conditionals, and the third thing that we are going to discuss today is the kind of questions which are generally asked with respect to critical reasoning when it comes to the examinations, any examination for that matter, and specifically the CLAT in our present case. So three things we are going to study. The first thing would be syllogisms, second thing would be conditionals, and the third thing would be the kind of critical reasoning questions which are generally asked in CLAT examinations. So guys, to begin with, the first thing that we are going to study today is syllogisms. What is syllogism, and what are the different kinds of categorical propositions which syllogisms generally have, and what kind of questions which in the CLAT examination may be asked. Okay, so syllogisms. As far as syllogisms is concerned, you can understand it in this way, like there are a set of arguments given, and from those arguments you have to come to a certain definite conclusion. So syllogisms is a way, or the use or the rules of syllogisms is a mechanism by which you use the rules to come to a certain conclusion. You use the given set of facts or premises or arguments to come to a certain conclusion on the basis of the information available in those premises. Now, basically there are four kind of categorical propositions. Every question related to syllogisms is based on categorical propositions, because it is the categorical proposition or the premises or the arguments on the basis of which you can come to a definite conclusion. Okay? All the questions related to syllogisms, जितने भी questions syllogisms से related होते हैं, they are based on certain premises, certain factual circumstances, certain information, certain arguments. Now these arguments, premises, information are referred to as categorical propositions. Categorical propositions. Categorical propositions मतलब they have a definite category. They have a definite category on the basis of which the kind of information they give are specific, or the kind of information that they deliver are specific with respect to the elements that are being taken into consideration in the given proposition. Now, when we talk about categorical propositions in syllogisms, there are four kinds of categorical propositions. What are the four kinds of categorical propositions? The first one is, I would be discussing all of these in detail. The first one is universal affirmative proposition, the second one being universal negative proposition, third one being particular affirmative proposition, and the fourth one being particular negative proposition. Now let us discuss in details as to what these propositions are. The first proposition, the first kind of categorical proposition is universal affirmative. Now, universal affirmative propositions are the kind of proposition, as the name in itself suggests, universal affirmative. That means it includes the universe at large and it says a positive thing about all the elements present in that universe. So when we talk about universal affirmative propositions, it means that these propositions talk about all the elements of a certain class and it discusses a positive idea, or it gives a positive prospect about all the elements present in that class about which the universal affirmative proposition is talking. Now, as far as this is concerned, an example of such a statement would be all A is B. Now, in this proposition or in this argument or in this premise, we are trying to say that all the elements belonging to the A class are such elements which belong to B class as well. Therefore, we are talking about all the elements, which means we are talking about the universality, and because we are saying a positive statement about all the elements of A in B, therefore this is a universal affirmative proposition. That is the first kind of proposition that we are talking when it comes to a universal affirmative proposition. Now, there is another concept which needs to be discussed here, which you would be using while dealing with the rules of syllogisms, or rather rules and fallacies, that would be discussed in the next session, not today. So with regard to those rules, today in this session I am referring you to one important concept called distribution in logic. Distribution. Now, I am discussing this concept because when we talk about the categorical propositions, the four kind of categorical propositions, it would be easy to discuss the distribution, the concept of distribution. Now, the concept of distribution says that if a certain proposition or a certain argument or a certain premise talks about all the elements, if a certain argument, certain proposition or certain premise talks about all the elements present in one class and it does not leave any element, it talks about all the elements and does not leave element, then it would be regarded as the said class is distributed or the said elements are distributed. For example, in the present case, since we are talking about all the elements of class A, all the elements of class A are being discussed, therefore it would be said that A, the term A is distributed. Okay, so are you getting this? This is essential. Distribution is the concept which says that if we are talking about all the elements in a certain term, then that term would be regarded as distributed. Okay, so in the present case, because the statement says all A is B, that means we are talking about all the elements of the term A, and therefore it would be said that all the elements of term A are distributed, or rather the term A in itself is distributed. The second now moving further, the second kind of syllogistic argument or the syllogistic or the categorical proposition that we have or we face generally is referred to as universal negative. Now, what is a universal negative proposition? You can say or you can understand it in this manner, that this is completely or in contradiction to what the first proposition says. The first proposition talks about an affirmative statement with respect to all the elements in that class, whereas universal negative statement or universal negative categorical proposition negates about the entire class for that matter. The universal negative proposition is a proposition whereby all the elements of one class do not belong or are excluded from all the elements of another class. An example of this kind of statement would be, for example, no A is B. No A is B, which means that none of the elements of the class A belong to any of the elements of class B. Therefore, no A is B. It means we are talking about all the elements in class A not belonging to all the elements in class B. Now, since there is an exclusion of the universe, of the entire universe, the universe of A and the universe of B, therefore, it is referred to as a universal negative proposition. Okay. Now, as far as the concept of distribution is concerned, with respect to a universal negative proposition, it is regarded as that both A, that means the one about which it is said, and B, both the terms are distributed in the present case. So, A is also distributed and B is also distributed. That means both the elements, that means none of the elements of the class A belong to none of the elements of class B. Therefore, the subject, that means A, which is the subject about which something is said, and the predicate which refers to the subject or which talks about the subject. So both the subject and the predicate are not distributed, or rather, simply, in order to simply understand it, both the terms are not distributed. Therefore, a universal negative proposition says, I'm sorry guys, both the elements, both the terms are actually distributed. Okay, so in the kind of universal affirmative proposition, it was that only one of the terms was distributed, however the other term was not distributed. In the kind of universal negative proposition, both the elements are distributed. Now, the third kind of proposition that we have is referred to as particular affirmative proposition. Particular affirmative, as the name suggests, particular, that means now we are talking about only some of the elements of any of the class. Now this class can be any class whichever we are referring, but because we are talking about particular elements of one class, we will only be taking into consideration certain elements, not all the elements. Now particular affirmative, it also asserts a positive thing about that entire class. Therefore, an example of this kind of statement can be particular affirmative, some A is B. Some A is B. Now, in this kind of statement, it is easily seen that some of the elements of A belong to some of the elements of B. However, some of the elements are there which do not belong to B. Therefore, in this kind of statement, we are not talking about all the elements. We are talking about only certain number of elements. Since we are not talking about all the elements, therefore it can be easily referred that such a kind of statement would be a particular affirmative, and at the same time, as far as the concept of distribution is concerned, neither, not even term A, not even term B, none of the terms are distributed, because as we have already learned that distribution, whenever a term would be distributed, it would talk about all the elements. In this case, it does not talk about all the elements, therefore it can easily be inferred that in the present case neither A is distributed nor B is distributed. Therefore, this is a particular affirmative proposition. Coming to the fourth kind of proposition, it is particular negative proposition. Now, particular negative proposition shall be some A is not B. That means we are talking about only certain elements of A which are not B. Some A is not B. This does not mean that some A is B. This means some A is not B. Particular and negative at the same time. Now, because in this kind of statement we are talking only about some of the elements of A which do not belong to B, and because these elements do not belong to B, this doesn't conclude to the fact that some of the elements of B, some of the elements of A belong to B. Some of the elements of A do not belong to B means none of the elements of B belong to A. This should be understood clearly. Some of the elements of A do not belong to B. If this is the class A and this is the class B, and these two are interlinking in such a way that some of the elements, say suppose some of the elements of A, now these are some of the elements which belong, just a sec guys, I'll elaborate this a little more. This is it, this is it, this is class A, this is class B. Now in this present case, we are not talking about this phase. This phase represents some of the A which belong to B. We are talking about the elements which are here. Now these elements do not belong to B. The elements here do not belong to B. Therefore, some A is not B, and therefore the entire class of B, this entire class of B is excluded. This is crucial. We are talking about some of the elements of A which do not belong to B. We are not talking about this phase, and therefore we are only talking about this case. And since some of the elements of A do not belong to B, however the entire B, because we are not taking this part into consideration, therefore entire B is eliminated, and thus in this kind of statement it is said that the term A is not distributed because some of the elements are being talked about. However, term B is distributed because we are talking about all the elements of term B. I hope I am clear about the all four kinds of propositions. Now, as far as the rules of the syllogisms is concerned, as I have already mentioned,